Welcome to Taking the Next Faithful Step, Part 2. "2023 marks the beginning of my 12th year as your bishop. It's the fourth implementation year of a strategic plan we launched the last time we gathered in this cathedral for convention, which was just 2 months before the COVID pandemic changed everything. And although we couldn't have anticipated the context we suddenly found ourselves in, the priorities we set and the disciplines we adopted helped your diocesan leadership forge a path. Other seismic events have occurred in our nation and the world since our last in-person convention, as you know, all within the context of political polarization and a global climate crisis. Friends, it's been a time. But convention, people of the Diocese of Washington, we are still here. We are still here. And each of you has a story to tell about what life has been like for you and your loved ones. Each congregation and ministry represented here has a story to tell of what you've been through and what you've learned. You are still here, and so am I. So will you just turn to someone, your neighbor, and say, "We are still here. We're still here. We are still here." We are among those. Not everyone made it through. Not everyone made it through. We are among those who have come through these great ordeals by the grace of God and the fact that we are living here as opposed to more ravaged parts of the world. We are still here. And our lives and ministries are God's gift to us and our gift to others. We each have a unique vocation to live as best we can. Despite our sins and through our gifts, we are among those whom God can work to realize what Jesus taught us to pray for every day, the coming of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. What Dr. King called, and so many others called, the beloved community. And we who've heard Jesus call us by name, we're among those he asks to embody his love. Now, in these past 3 years, these COVID years, I have watched in awe as you, the people of this diocese, have persevered and adapted and did what was hard. If you're tired, you have every reason to be tired, but you've come through with courage and generosity. You have supported one another in grief. You are reclaiming occasions for joy, and you simply refuse to allow your fatigue and your own struggles to stop you from loving your neighbors, caring for the earth, working for justice, and showing up just about anywhere to make life better for someone else. Thank you. Thank you. Will you turn to your neighbor and say, "Thank you. Thank you for all that you've done, for all that you're doing. Thank you for being here. The Episcopal Church is still here, and God is not finished with the Diocese of Washington." And so, using our convention theme of taking the next faithful step, I'm going to use this address to highlight 3 areas of diocesan ministry that we identified back in 2020 as our core priorities. On the screen, revitalizing our congregations to grow the Jesus movement, inspiring our people to grow in faith, partnering in ministries of equity and justice for greater impact in our communities. And in each area, I'm going to describe steps we'll take in the coming year And I'm going to begin with what we originally named as our second priority because it's become my first: inspiring our people to grow in faith. Friends, we can only inspire others to do what we ourselves are doing. So let's take a moment now for personal inventory. How is my faith? How has yours grown or changed in the past year or the past several years? Specifically, how has God been present for you in your trials and your blessings? What has Jesus said to you through the words of a friend or stranger, in your private prayers, or the sermon you wondered if was being preached just to you, or for the preachers that you were preaching? And what was it like when you felt that you were stretched way beyond your means, and the Spirit met you there and saw you through? See, I'm persuaded that tending to our lives in Christ, personally, collectively, is the most important thing for us to focus on right now. Because we've all had to spend enormous energy on institutional maintenance. And we still do. All of you are working so hard to keep things going. Focused a lot on what we might call the chores of being the church. And I have no doubt that God is grateful to you for all that you're doing, all these efforts, and also maybe a bit concerned for you. And I'll speak to the institutional side of things in a moment because I must. But the reality is that tending to our spiritual lives is often the first thing to be sacrificed when workloads increase, right up there with self-care. Now, sometimes that can't be helped when we're facing crisis or we're responsible for another person's care who needs us. But we can also get accustomed to ways of living that are not life-giving. I know that I can. And that's why it's on my heart to linger here a bit, because it's so easy to lose sight of what we need to stay rooted in Christ and draw our strength from Him. And because we can't lead others on a path that we aren't walking ourselves. Now, thankfully, it's not all up to us. We know this. Jesus is drawing closer to us all the time, whether we call on Him or not. What makes a Christian life the Christian life, as you know, is our response. And personally, this means taking the time to listen to His voice. And collectively, it means creating space, hospitable spaces, for people to share their lives and explore the deeper questions of faith. It means practicing the disciplines of prayer and hospitality and forgiveness and all the other ways we receive His presence among us as the one who heals and forgives and inspires. On my Sunday visitations, I often carry with me these Path of Discipleship cards, and I use them to prompt spiritual conversations with members of the vestry or in forums. And typically what I do is I give everybody three cards and ask them to pick one whose question they would be willing to answer. And if they don't like any of them, they can ask for a fourth card. And here are a few examples. How does knowing you are made in God's image impact how you relate to others? Or, share an experience when your faith sustained you in a difficult time. Or, when do you like to pray, and why? People surprise themselves with what they respond. Lay leaders will tell me afterwards how refreshing it was to talk about faith in church or at a church meeting, and how much they learned about people they'd been serving alongside for years. So, let's talk to one another right now. You're going to see on the screen 3 sample questions from the Path of Discipleship deck for adults. And if you're willing, pick one that you'd be okay talking about in conversation with 3 or so people sitting next to you. Now, if you don't want to do this, that's fine, but you might stay and listen to others. We're going to take some time here, and we might need to do some moving around and adjusting translations and so forth. How would you describe your journey of faith? What is the common message Christ wants us to take into the world? Share a time when you did that. Or share a time when someone did or said something that helped you more than they will ever know. Okay? I'm going to give you 5 whole minutes. No? Two-minute warning. few more seconds. If I could bring you back, please. Okay. All right, I'm going to ask you to maybe pick up these conversations over lunch. If you're interested, we have samples of these decks near the registration table in the back, and information on how you can order them. It's just one of very many simple ways. It's amazing what an invitation to go just a little bit deeper can do to help us draw closer to God and one another. However you do it, I encourage you to tend to your faith and to foster as many ways as possible for your people to grow in faith. Congregations who do this well tend to grow numerically too, in addition to their spiritual vibrancy, because they're cultivating a center, the center from which everything else flows. And as a diocese, we'll continue to make resources available through the School for Christian Faith and Leadership, which so far is one of the most fruitful outcomes of the strategic plan. Members of the diocesan staff are continually searching out new resources, and along with many gifted leaders of our diocese, they are creating more. Presiding Bishop's Office is also investing heavily in resourcing conversations like this, and I'd like to show you just a trailer for one example, entitled Centered.
Centered is a discipleship series guiding small gathered communities to get deeply rooted in love with God and one another, so that we grow to look, act, and love more like Jesus. The experience includes an initial 3-session training for group facilitators and a core of 9 sessions where church members, neighbors, and friends gather to share a meal and grateful prayer, explore a short film and questions about God, belonging, and living a meaningful life, and support each other in committing to intentionally following Jesus and his way of love. Our hope is that Centered is a faith builder and a movement builder. We hope it fuels a small group or circle movement that empowers lay people, transforms lives, and grows churches numerically and spiritually. Centered was created by a diverse team of discipleship and spirituality leaders and digital content creators across the Episcopal Church and stretching into the Anglican Communion. Together, through prayer and discernment, they developed and filmed this suite of resources and tools that we hope will be a blessing for generations to come. Across the Communion today, there's an energetic movement for intentional discipleship, what Anglicans everywhere call Jesus-shaped life. The Episcopal incarnation of that movement is the way of love, an intentional commitment to following Jesus that's centered on 7 habits: turn, learn, pray, worship, bless, go, and rest, that shape us into his likeness. All these efforts spring from a common, growing, and urgent realization that being Christian is about having a God-saturated life. Not just inside the building, not just for an hour on Sunday, not just in meetings of the whole congregation. There is no better way to grow and practice the Jesus way than in our homes, in our day-to-day lives, with a circle of followers who love and mentor one another as apprentices in the Jesus way. That has been true all along. Note the practice of the Church in the book of Acts and its numerical and spiritual growth. While some Episcopalians and Anglicans may have misgivings about small groups, we believe it's more than worth overcoming that resistance for the opportunity waiting on the other side. So please, find the language that works best for you. Small group, discipleship circle, small gathered community, neighborhood group, life group, cell gathering, or something else. Whatever the name, a small group or circle provides space for prayerful support and accountability as we seek to live the Jesus way. Centered was created for just this purpose, to help participants to walk that path, not alone, but together, in small groups and circles. Thank you for answering the call to help facilitate this life-changing journey.
Perhaps you noticed one of our own, Mildred Reyes, is featured and centered. The program is available, by the way, in English, Spanish, and French. Now, in a moment, I'll suggest ways that congregations wanting to go deeper in inspiring their people to grow in faith might do this together. But to bring this section to a close and underscore the importance of this, beginning in 2023, I'm establishing a requirement for those brought before me or any bishop in this diocese for the sacraments of confirmation, reception, and renewal of baptismal promises. And for those people here preparing others for these sacraments, this is my request, that you ensure that those you present are able to tell in their own words the story of Jesus. I'd like those affirming their commitment to Christ to know his story as it's told in Scripture, beginning with his birth, a few highlights from his teaching and healing ministry, an understanding of why he was so controversial among the religious and political leaders of his day, and what led to his crucifixion, and finally, what happened on the day of resurrection and when he appeared to his disciples. Now, knowing things about Jesus isn't the same as having a relationship with the living Christ, but we can't follow him if we don't know about him and know his teachings. And the reason I've decided to make this request is that I've come to realize how few of our people can tell his story with confidence. Now, I'm sure most know more than they think they know, but the reality is that his story isn't accessible to them. It doesn't dwell within them in a way that they can draw upon. Now, I want to assure you, there's not going to be a test that people have to pass. I'm not going to turn anybody away. And I'm not asking you to totally rework your preparation process. But hear me, friends. Hear me, colleagues. Everyone who wants to follow Jesus deserves to have his story inside them in such a way that they can see their lives through his. And because faith backgrounds and exposure to Scripture vary, this is going to be a different learning process for every person. And there may be resistance to this, I understand that. Our people are reluctant to read the Bible. And Jesus is badly caricatured in the culture, which is all the more reason for us and our people to know him well. And we'll work together on this. We will share resources to make Jesus' story come alive. And I welcome your suggestions. I've asked the Reverend Amanda Aches Cardwell, who is our missioner for faith formation and development, to serve as the resource gatherer and source of encouragement for this endeavor. The point is, I want our people to be confident in their faith, and for others to know that we in the Diocese of Washington are committed to growing in faith and inspiring others to do the same. Okay? I'm going to move to the second priority, but before we do, I think you deserve a break. Let's just stretch for a second and maybe ponder what I've said so far, and give you just a couple minutes just to stretch. I know how comfortable those chairs can be. Okay. Okay. Have a seat. I'm going to turn now to revitalization. Revitalizing our congregations to grow the Jesus movement. So whether we can say we're living in a post-pandemic world or not is for public health officials to determine. 3 people texted me this morning and told me they couldn't come today because either they or someone in their household had COVID. So there you are. But we can begin now, and we must begin to assess in earnest the impact the past 3 years has had on our congregations. And early assessments are both encouraging and worrisome. And obviously, we're not all in the same place. There's always been a wide spectrum of congregational life and real inequities among us. Broadly speaking, whatever trends of vitality or decline our congregations were experiencing before the pandemic accelerated. There are a few exceptions to this, but not many. Now, some eat-out congregations, by your own account, are feeling very hopeful right now. For some of you, pre-pandemic life, in terms of energy and engagement, is returning, which is really wonderful to see. Yes, there have been some changes. Death, the Great Resignation have taken their toll on all of us. It's no exception to the stronger of our congregations. Those new to your communities, you tell us, aren't as inclined to take up the work of church as others had in the past. And so the work of ministry rests on fewer shoulders. It's always been the case, but the trend accelerated. So it's an exciting time for you, and leader fatigue is real. The next faithful step for the more robust eat-out congregations may be one of pruning, then, letting go of some things that were once life-giving but are less so now, so that you can invest more in the places where your people are showing up. And that's one section or one group of congregations among us. The majority of eat-out congregations are doing okay, and okay is not bad. But you're not seeing a return to pre-pandemic levels of engagement, most notably in worship attendance, financial support, and other metrics of vitality. Unfortunately, you've learned a lot through the pandemic, how to streamline things, how to worship, and offer other gatherings via technology, which is a tremendous blessing to those who would have otherwise lost their connection to you, the congregations they love. But it also means that the work of church maintenance rests even more heavily on you, and that your future actually depends on creating the kind of spiritual community that other people who are not yet a part of you would find compelling. And who would that be? That's an important question for all of us, with particular urgency for some. Now, in the diocese, we will continue to invest the lion's share of our resources in congregations and congregational revitalization. But we're learning that the resources aren't as helpful when congregational leadership capacity works against your ability to do the very things that are needed for renewal. And those of you who are working really hard and feel overextended, tell us that you need a break, and you do. You really do. But as Carrie Niehoff observes, the cure for an unsustainable pace isn't more time off or a week at the beach. The cure for an unsustainable pace is to create a sustainable pace. And the reality is that many of our congregations can't successfully do this on their own. Leaders of some of our Black churches told us that at last year's convention. Remember when they asked for the creation of a task force on Black ministries made up of members from many Black congregations, or predominantly Black, to collectively address their situation and explore ways that they might thrive now. And they also wanted the rest of us to acknowledge the reality of racism in this diocese and its impact. Now, the task force worked all this past year under the guidance of its chair, the Reverend Ricardo Shepard, and Canon Anne-Marie Jeffrey. And you'll find their final report in your convention booklet beginning on page 51, which I think is going to resonate with more than just our predominantly Black congregations. The Diocesan Council accepted their report in October, and in December voted unanimously to ask on its first recommendation, which was an acknowledgement that we needed to keep doing this, to create an ongoing Black Ministries Committee charged with the next steps of implementation. And we're now accepting applications for service on that committee. But friends, the task force did courageous and prophetic work, and I wonder if you might join me in thanking the members of the task force here with us today. Two weeks ago, Canon Jeffrey and I had lunch with the 6 full-time rectors serving congregations in the region of Southern Maryland. To provide a bit of context for the rest of you, there are 20 EDAL congregations in Southern Maryland, located in St. Mary's and Charles counties, and the southern portion of Prince George's counties. Many of these congregations go back to the time when we were the Diocese of Maryland. The majority are served by part-time clergy. There are currently 5 Southern Maryland congregations in clergy transition. 2 have been advertising their part-time positions for months with no applications. Now, the clergy around that table, that lunch table, they serve the strongest congregations in Southern Maryland, and they have a lot in common with many EDAL congregations in that these congregations can afford a full-time priest and maybe 1 or possibly 2 part-time staff. And so the clergy wear many hats, and by necessity, they carry a heavy load of church chores, alongside the heroically dedicated lay leaders who are among the invisible saints of this diocese. And when I asked the clergy what was hardest about their work, they spoke of the isolation and how they would love to work on a team. And some have a sense of that team with the deacons of Southern Maryland who are a godsend. But even so, loneliness is real. They spoke of the weight of church maintenance, be it the care of the buildings, the outsized list of expectations placed upon them or that they place upon themselves. The deep desire to do more actual ministry when their days are consumed by these chores. And then I asked them what they loved most about their ministries, and their eyes lit up when they spoke. And what was surprising even to them was the variety of loves around the table: teaching, pastoral care, leadership development, the planning and leading of worship. And listening to them, I thought, there's got to be a way to create some kind of team approach here so we could allow our clergy to lean into their strengths and support one another, really support one another, rather than being solo operators scattered across a region, all responsible for everything. And I asked, okay, what if we invited your vestries to come together so they could hear us talk and you could speak of what it's like for you, and to just consider how we might organize things differently so that we could benefit collectively from your strengths and that of your congregational leaders, and collectively address these areas of vulnerability or weakness. And they've all been in their ministries for a while, except for Peter Ackerman, who arrived like yesterday. Hi, Peter. But they all thought that their leaders would be open to an exploratory conversation, which we're going to schedule later this spring, and include other interested vestries and clergy of neighboring congregations. And I'm not talking about mergers here, right? But some new way of partnering through strength to build greater strength. Because strength in ministry is what fuels joy. And the experience of Southern Maryland clergy is not unique. We could have had the same conversation in every region or with congregations across regions. And now this isn't for everyone, I know, and many would resist even having the conversation. And I know that. The most consistently expressed fear is the loss of parish identity, which I understand. I really do. But if we don't do something to ease the burden that we're placing on our lay and clergy leaders, we can't expect as fruitful a return from all our efforts in revitalization. It gets harder to find their successors, and nor can we realize our God-given dreams for justice and all the good that we feel God calls us to, because the trends of decline will continue. So with those willing to step out in faith in this way, we'll just begin to explore how to build ministry capacity across congregations or regions. And it could result in joint efforts to create some of those small group gatherings across a given region so that Episcopalians who live in the same neighborhood but attend different churches might come together. We could find ways to strengthen youth and young adult ministries. We could address the spiritual longings and questions of those of us blessed to live past our 60s and beyond. You might discover efficiencies in building use and maintenance, or the bane of every solo priest's existence, the churning out of weekly bulletins. Am I right? I mean, the amount of hours we pay clergy to produce bulletins. And we wonder what's not working. These conversations are in keeping with a goal of our strategic plan to develop stewardship strategies so that congregations are less constrained by maintenance concerns. But friends, it's also an expression of pastoral concern for you, our clergy and lay leaders at the center of our churches, so that you can live healthy, Christ-centered lives. Now, 2 final notes on this topic of revitalization. First, and this is a hard topic, we have to have an honest conversation regarding debt, with particular concern for those congregations carrying burdens beyond their assets or ability to pay, and those for whom deferred maintenance expenses far exceed their members' financial capacity. Now, taking on debt is necessary at times. Most congregations that do, typically during capital campaigns, have the means and a plan to meet those obligations. But there are some with burdensome debts that they have been carrying for decades. And the diocese is a co-signer on 4 of these loans. And there isn't a one-size solution. Sadly, there's not a diocesan fund that can wipe out all these loans, and pay the millions in deferred maintenance costs that threaten the viability of other congregations. And the hard truth is that the pandemic years have brought some of our communities to the edge of viability. And we have a lot of buildings. Canon to the Ordinary Andrew Walter is going to be taking up this effort to face into these realities and work as best we can toward possible solutions. These are not going to be easy conversations, but the time has come. And second, and this is a hopeful note, very hopeful, God continues to raise up among us those who are longing to create something new. And many of you are here today, and God has placed in your hearts visions of what could be, and you are eager to experiment, to engage with those you know would love the Episcopal Church, if only we would meet them where they are, rather than expecting them to come to us. And last year, we started taking steps in fulfilling this strategic goal of growing younger, to start and restart up to 3 congregations with rising generations in mind. Leaders of 6 congregations are part of our first Growing Young cohort, and together they're exploring ways they can support and encourage within their congregations those rising up. Others of us are studying church planting and exploring ways we can begin to invest staff and resources toward new expressions of Episcopal community. And we're going to continue this. We're going to take further steps in 2023, focusing our energies in 2 places of great potential. And we're going to identify leaders and create the ministry teams. So let me close with this section with words from our presiding bishop. And he wrote this in response to the 2021 parochial report data from across the Episcopal Church. Spoiler alert, the trends of decline are everywhere. Right? And he wrote this: "It's important to remember that the institutional church as we know it has not been the form that Christianity has always taken. The essence and core of the church is not its outward form, which will always change over time. The essence of the core is Jesus Christ, his spirit, his teachings, his manner of life, his way of love, and the movement he founded cannot be stopped. We need our church leaders, both ordained and lay, to embrace this moment of reinvention. And the folks I see rising up are going to bring us into a profoundly different age. And I see the same rising up among us. And part of our work now is to create space and provide resources for those who feel called to lead us through this moment of reinvention." So that's the second section. You want to stretch one more time? Okay. Our third and final strategic priority: to partner in ministries of equity and justice for greater impact in our communities. Okay, now here, in this area of equity and justice, this is where I see manifestations of sacrificial love, courage, and cooperation across the diocese that takes my breath away. And the work is so hard, but it's also a source of energy and joy. One example, I was talking to the Reverend Meredith Hefner at St. James Potomac a while ago. She told me that while some traditional aspects of congregational life haven't come back very much after the pandemic lockdown, there are new people in church, and they are most enthusiastic about St. James's efforts to address racial injustice, care for the earth, and to promote mental health. These ministries, she said, are taking off. So too at St. Thomas's in Washington, D.C., a congregation that, in the words of their rector, the Reverend Lisa Ahuja, is leaning hard into being a blessing to their community. They're meeting the physical and spiritual needs of migrants arriving by bus to Washington, D.C. from the border states. Many are being dropped off at all hours of the night with nothing more than the clothes on their backs. And other congregations have been part of this tremendous collective effort. St. Matthew's San Mateo in Hyattsville is providing temporary housing for migrants, mostly from Venezuela, and they're collecting food, clothing, and household items. Others are helping. Our Spanish-speaking congregations are all pitching in to help. Meanwhile, our effort to welcome refugees from Afghanistan continues across the diocese, and many of you are sponsoring Afghan families and others from around the world. You're working to secure their housing, their medical care, and their employment. Still, others of you are addressing rising food insecurity throughout the diocese. You're opening your churches as distribution sites and respite centers for those experiencing homelessness. Others of you are adopting schools, public schools or hospitals, or are working in partnership with Samaritan Ministry of Greater Washington or the Bishop Walker School and others. And we're going to highlight some of these efforts throughout the day, but they are everywhere. And one of the things I love about you is that you go about this work often so quietly and matter-of-factly. You just simply do what needs to be done, and you make the connections among yourselves, and I find out later. And I wish I could lift up every example I just stumble across, which is no doubt a small percentage of what you do. But here's one example, found out about just before Christmas. Church of the Atonement in Southeast Washington is a fresh produce distribution site. The food bank delivers pallets of fresh produce to the church once a month. Members of Atonement bag the produce, and community food pantries come and pick it up. Atonement prepares up to 500 bags a month. And now Christ Church Georgetown is partnering in this effort. Happens all the time. In our endeavors to partner for greater impact, diocesan deacons have been instrumental. Yes, applause. Fuerte, applause. The ministry of our deacons, now 40 strong, help us show up where love and justice are needed. We're going to celebrate deacons' ministry later today, and that of Archdeacon Sue von Rottenkrantz, who is retiring. Last year's convention, as you heard, we commissioned a Diocesan Creation Care Committee whose purpose was to amplify and build upon congregational initiatives to address the climate crisis and other environmental concerns. Many of you are taking steps in this area. You're recycling, you're reducing single-use plastic, you're cleaning trash, you're putting up solar panels on your buildings, and you are such an inspiration. And later in the convention, we'll consider a resolution sponsored by members of the Creation Care Committee, because their next faithful step is to encourage us to set collective goals. The first of which is to plant trees and protect natural habitats across our regions, joining with Anglicans around the world in an initiative known as the Communion Forest. And the last area I'll mention is our ongoing efforts to face and address racial inequity and injustice. How many congregations have participated in a Sacred Ground Circle? Just raise your hand. Look around, friends. For those of us who, for those of you who don't know, it's a curriculum that looks at the reality of race in our country. And for those of us who are white and raised to think about our racial history as little as possible, Sacred Ground is an eye-opening and times heartbreaking experience. And then we just can't help but see. It's like our eyes are opened and we can't see the history of anything anymore. Where we live in Maryland and the District of Columbia through the lens of race. And our congregations are a part of that history and the present-day realities. And there is need for reckoning and repair. And we have a part to play. When the word reparations first became part of our lexicon, I I resisted its implications for us. I was a little scared, frankly. But the more I learn and engage, the greater my understanding and commitment to reparations grows. And I can't tell you how to vote on the reparations resolution or any other, but I do want you to know the seriousness with which I and members of the diocesan staff are embracing this work, because we all have an opportunity to do something brave that will honor and acknowledge suffering beyond our imagining, and to bring life to other people and ourselves as we take steps toward the realization of beloved community. And if all that I've spoken of today in those three areas, growing in faith, revitalizing our congregations, partnering for justice, it seems like a lot, it's because it is. Considering the whole of our diocese and discerning God's Spirit among us, that's a really big deal. And you are here for a reason. It is our work today. Thank you for being here. And when we launched the strategic plan 2020, feels like a decade ago, we envisioned it as a 5-year process, meaning that in 2025, we would assess all that we had learned and accomplished. And I proposed to diocesan leadership that we extend the implementation period for a year, which gives us some time, more time for the initiatives we've begun to bear fruit, and takes into account all that we didn't anticipate when we started. I do promise a complete assessment in 2026 and an evaluation of the strategic process itself. And I realize that the strategic plan isn't something you think about every day, if at all, except on days like today, and that's all right, because I do. And so does your diocesan staff, like every day, because that's what you pay us for. It's what guides our work among you. And 2026 is also the year that I will turn 67 and have completed 15 years as your bishop. And that's when diocesan leaders and I will discern the next faithful steps for the episcopate. Don't have a crystal ball here, but in all likelihood, we will call for the election of my successor. I mean, I love my job, but it's a big one. And as I get older, I realize that the future leadership of our diocese belongs to those coming up behind me. And part of my job now, my most important job now, is to identify, encourage, mentor, and make space for rising leaders, and to provide a strong foundation for the blessed person who will be your 10th bishop. And to that work, I remain wholeheartedly committed. I'm eligible this year for a 3-month sabbatical, but for both personal and vocational reasons, it's just not a good time for me to be gone for that long. So I've asked those who hold me accountable to my work if I might take a 1-month sabbatical during the summer for the next 3 years. And they've agreed, and so I'll be on sabbatical leave in July. And my plan thus far is to go somewhere where I can take a very long walk and maybe dare to get on my road bike again, and then to go and play with my grandchildren. And then come back, ready to continue the ministry that God has entrusted to us all. So I want to give the final word to the presiding bishop, who recently said this: when the church engages the community and is the presence of love and justice and compassion, the church comes alive. It may not attract great throngs, but Jesus only had 12, and look what they did. And if we listen to Jesus and what Jesus tells us to do and actually do it, we will make a difference. We will make a difference in every context in which we find ourselves. Friends, that is our call. Thank you for saying yes. I add my yes to yours. Together, we are still here. And may I never cease to thank God and thank you for the privilege of serving as your bishop. Thank you. Thank you.